Father Malone, we're nearing the, I guess this is the halfway point, right? We're past the halfway point at this point, I guess.
Well, now we're into the halfway. Yeah, we're now halfway.
Yeah, this is the halfway point.
As close to halfway as one can be. At the end of The Road Warrior, the beginning of this movie, is the demarcation point.
Yeah, for a lot of people. But I don't know if it's that way for you and I, but I think it's going to be interesting to talk about this movie because we've kind of alluded to it in the last couple episodes that we've done, that this is a moment in the franchise's history where a lot of people are very upset for look, I'm not going to say justifiable reasons. I think a lot of people are upset. And I think those are probably the same people that were upset about Michael Keaton being cast as Bruce Wayne. It's just like
the exact same people.
Yeah, that are still complaining about these kinds of things now. And look, this movie doesn't detract from my ability, your ability, or anybody's ability to appreciate Road Warrior. It doesn't. It doesn't detract at all. Is this what people wanted? I have no idea. Clearly not.
Obviously not.
Clearly not. But this is what George Miller wanted. And as far as I'm concerned, that's more important. Especially given the, I think it's a term worth using on him, the auteur that he is, the, writer director that he is, which I think, a lot of auteurs happen to also be writer directors. I'm very curious because on this episode of the Culture Cast, we are at the halfway point for Mad Max because we're going to be covering Fury Road and Furiosa here in the very near future. But on this episode, I'm still your host, Chris Tasher, and I'm joined once again by Midnight Viewing and Dark Destination's own Father Malone.
In the desert sun, every step that you take could be your final one.
Good Lord. Yes, if you don't know what we're talking about, but you clicked on the episode anyways, we're going to be covering Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, not Mad Max 3. That's not the title of this film.
Mel Gibson is Mad Max. They will worship him.
Who do you think I am?
She will challenge him.
And I say that this man has broken the law.
And this is his greatest adventure. Mel Gibson, Tina Turner, Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome.
Once again, directed by George Miller, written by Terry Hayes and George Miller. And yes, once again, and this is the last time I have to say this, it stars Mel Gibson as Mad Max. What's Max up to this time? Just fucking around, just hanging out, having his shit stolen from him. And then it's what's funny is it feels more serendipitous as a movie than the last two did. Oh, his stuff gets stolen, so then he has to go to Bartertown, and then they have something. It's that this movie, if anything, feels very video gamey in terms of one thing happens, which leads to a whole host of other things happening. But the main thing that happened is still essentially the goal throughout the movie, which is for Mad Max to get the fuck away from these people. Once again, he's just minding his own business in the desert, and Bruce Spence, as a different character, steals his shit from him. And that sets into motion the entire plot of Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. So, Father Malone, I'm going to kick it to you first. What do you think of this film, and why are you a defender? Why do you defend this movie? It's so bad. It's not Road Warrior. It's so bad. That's sarcasm, folks, by the way.
Do you know the date this movie premiered? It's in July of 1985, right?
July 10th.
July 10th, 1985. That's when I saw this movie. This was the first time that I could go see on my own a Mad Max film in the theater, and I could not have been more excited. Having seen the previews and seeing that Max was off on a different adventure very much excited me, and I was in no way let down. I fucking loved this movie then. I rewatched it a bunch leading up to this podcast. I love it now. I think it's a worthy entry into the Mad Max canon. If you're viewing the Mad Max canon, as we've been talking about in the previous episodes of this series, if you're looking at Mad Max as individual stories that are connected only tangentially through our lead character who barely has a place in each of the stories being told, then there's absolutely nothing untoward with having him rescuing children it's
fucking insane is what it is.
Yeah,
all of a sudden it's Peter Pan. All of a sudden it's Peter Pan. It's kind of what it felt like halfway through the movie. I was like, all right, Like
I'm
there's
running the plot down in my head, Chris, and I'm like, wow, this is fucking crazy. So, yeah, I guess if you just were expecting another high-octane, oiled-up muscle men flick, you're going to be disappointed with this one. But in the spirit of filmmaking and storytelling, like, I thought this is delightful.
This is an epic. Like, this feels like an epic. There's more going on here. Because, again, like, part of the story is Mad Max getting screwed over once again and being, essentially having to unwander back from the wasteland with these essentially what are effectively Lost Boys from Peter Pan. I mean, that's what this is in a lot of ways. And Max is all of a sudden leading them. And I don't know is it the kids of it all? Do people hate kids? And that's what it is. That's one of the things. I didn't find the child actors to be much of anything. They were not obnoxious. I think they did just as much as was needed. But I understand the sentiment of, I don't want to watch my franchise have kids injected into it. I felt similarly to The Mummy and The Mummy Returns. All of a sudden, there's a kid on screen. All of a sudden, the kid's being a precocious little shit. Like, okay. I mean, look, that's the filmmaker's choice. And in this movie, I understand why, like you've alluded to already, if you were watching it for the muscle humongous, this movie doesn't have that. I mean, it does, but it doesn't, but it does. I mean, Master Blaster is in this movie, but
There you go.
But George Miller also undercuts the Master Blaster payoff intentionally. And I appreciate that because, again, he's not just playing the same song in a minor key. He's playing a completely different song, just with the same instrument. And that's what this feels like. Look, there is a chase scene. It is the third act of this film, but it's more like the fourth act of the movie. It's not, this movie is not so easily parsed out as the last two movies. There's so much going on in this movie, and it's weird that in a third movie, they do more world crafting than they do in the first two movies. But this whole movie is more about really filling in the world and how society has taken to the world that they exist in now. It's answering questions that people clearly didn't ask or have any interest in having answered for them by the filmmaker. I get it. But just because they're not making the movie you want doesn't make it a bad movie. It makes it subjectively not something you're into, but objectively, I think, like you said, it's just as interesting a movie as the second one, if not more so, because more bizarre chances are taken in this movie. And there are objectively stranger things introduced in this movie than in the last one.
One of the reasons that I like this movie so much is exactly what you just touched on, which is George Miller out there building the world and filling us in and what else is going on. If your conception of this wasteland is just gangs of marauding bikers and miscreants, who gives a shit? Like how far do you go with that story? Like, it's just all about the gasoline, and there's nothing to it other than that. They're just getting more gas so they can drive around to get more gas so they can drive around. Like, what else is going on in this world? Well, here it is. Bartertown. That's what's going on in this world. There's this enclave of kids in some paradise over there. The city still exists. If you look hard and long enough, you can find the Sydney Opera House still there. I like going to all of these places. I like finding out what else is in the world, and I like finding out Max's place in it, that he can interact with people still, that there are still humans that are out there making it happen from the chaos. Thank you, Auntie Entity.
Well, and that is the thing about this movie that I'm so not concerned, but I'm curious because it feels like the more I look at the stuff for Furiosa, the more it's going to be like this movie. And I will be shocked if the feelings aren't similar again because of, once again, the Fury Road of it all. Furiosa has a real steep hill to climb with a lot of people who saw Fury Road and think that it is God's gift to Earth in terms of action movies. I'm not saying it's not. I just don't resonate with the movie like that. I know that there are plenty of people that think it is, that it ropes the moon. And I'm not saying it doesn't. It's just, what do you do after that movie? Where do you go from there? You're not going to do it again.
We'll see.
Well, but my point is you don't do it again. And I think that's exactly what George Miller is doing here. He could have done Mad Max 3 and it just be the Road Warrior again.
Chase. It could have been Fury Road, which was already on his mind.
Right.
But he wanted to take a detour.
Which I think works for me in terms of, and I don't think it works more than Mad Max 2, I think it works just as much as Mad Max 2 in a different way. Its expectations are different. There are things that, Mel Gibson actually has dialogue in this movie. A fair amount of it, too. Like, he says more in the first 15 minutes of this movie than he does in the entire hour and a half run of the last movie.
Yeah, it's the one where we actually get to know Max a little bit. And we get to see him making choices that do not benefit him. Every choice he's made so far has been only to further his own goals, whatever his fucking mysterious goals happen to be. But in this one, we see him making moral decisions with Master Blaster, or rather just Blaster at that point. Like, not part of the deal, not going to crush this guy. And in that, the wonderful thing about a scene like that is an accumulation of the character. This is the arc of the character going on, because I don't think the guy at the beginning of The Road Warrior would have hesitated to crush the skull of Master just so he can get his stuff back and get back on the road.
No, he would not have hesitated in one iota at all. And it's interesting. Like, I was reading some of the reviews for this movie, and the reviews for this movie are pretty unfair. But again, they're unfair because of the expectations set by the previous movie. And I understand. I mean, again, look, we live in a time and a place right now where if you took, I don't know, just James Bond and turned James Bond into something that it is, quote, not, unquote, you'd have a whole lot of people upset. But at the same time, can we literally stop making the same thing over and over again? Because at some point, it will stop working as well. And what do you do then? Then you do something like this. So either make the decision ahead of time to do it and actually lean into it, or you do it after the fact and you have to catch up because you've essentially, what can you do with a car chase movie? We'll make it the whole movie. What do you do after that? That's what I'm saying about Furiosa. Like, where do you go from here? We saw what George Miller went to, which is something so bizarre, it alienated the original audience, or some of the original audience, immensely, to the point where they wanted another Mad Max movie because this movie wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And I love that about this movie because it's so un-Mad Max, but at the same time, it is perfectly Mad Max. Because it's having a conversation about society falling apart the same way the first movie did. It's kind of showing that was what society looked like pre-Fallout. This is what a society or a community can look like further down the road. We saw it in the last movie with the community, but this is like they're built into this place. Bartertown is a self-functioning ecosystem, and that's something we haven't seen yet in these movies. And that's so exciting and weird compared to just, again, him interacting with another kind of like oasis-y group of people. I mean, we kind of get that in this movie too. It kind of still checks some of those boxes. It just, that's not the point of the movie, which I understand will make some people who love this franchise very disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, I like the opportunity to get to see Max and watch the way he handles himself in the rest of the world. And it hints toward other adventures that he's been having. This is, this might be his first time at Bartertown, but he's clearly been to places like this. It's so intriguing. He loses the V8 Interceptor in the last movie. When this movie starts, he's got this giant, like, truck vehicle that's being pulled by a team of camels, and he has a monkey in the back. Where did he just come from?
Right. But to your point, the idea of this being folklore, like, I love that about these movies, is that it's just like, I don't know, it feels like a fairy tale like that. And I kind of feel like George Miller, if you asked him, like, what is Mad Max inspired by, like, really at its base level, it's kind of like a modern day, like you said, Gulliver's Travels, which is kind of a fairy tale. You're back.
Ah, okay.
But it's kind of a fairy tale or fairy tale adjacent. Like, it's a tall tale. This is a tall tale. It's like,
a tall tale that also gives us a character moment where someone tries to sell him water and he produces a Geiger counter from somewhere within his outfit. Also, I was, again, speaking of the folktale nature of it, right? When we last saw Max, he's standing on a road. He's got his buzz cut. He's in his leathers. He's all fucked up looking, but he is mean and tough and whatever. When we meet him here, he has hair down his back, and he's basically dressed like a Bedouin out in the desert. Like, he's a whole new guy. This whole new tale. Like, do we know who's telling this tale? It might be the kids, right?
I guess so. I mean, that's my assumption. Is the story is essentially being told by the kids of planet Earth, the Lost Boys, as it were.
Yeah, and if we're to believe that these are chronological in order, as George Miller has said they are, right? No matter what gaps in between the movies, what tales were not being told of Max, what I like is, and what this movie really provides, is that I think this is the movie where Max actually figures out his place in this world.
Right. Agreed.
In the first movie, it's just a free fall into the world, and then it's just stay alive and keep going no matter what. But along the way, he inadvertently begins helping people. And I think here is the moment where he realizes that his mission is actually to go from place to place and find the problem, or let the problem find him, and then solve it.
I totally agree. And I love that about these movies, the way that they've been set up. How does Fury Road start like this? I don't remember. Whereas Fury Road a lot more like narratively conventional.
Fury Road begins with him being captured by Martin Joe's boys.
So there's no narrative structure that's similarly to these last two movies.
No, but it is once again Max finding himself in a situation that his instant reaction is, I'll just get out of it and get out of here. But once he looks around and sees what's going on, he always kind of makes up his mind to do the right thing.
Which is what's interesting, because in this movie, I feel like he's less of an anti-hero than he was in the last movie. This is maybe in a lot of ways, it's so weird to say this, and I was reading some of the criticisms about this movie. This movie has been toned down from the last movie.
Well, I'd say he's not an anti-hero here. I'd say he's just the hero of this movie.
Right. But what I'm saying is, because that's the case and that he's not the anti-hero, the things that he's doing feel a lot less violent and aggressive. Like, I'm not going to say that this is like for kids, but there's some of this that does kind of feel like it's for kids. And
Look, it's a PG-13 and the last one was a hard R.
Right. Like a hard R. Like this, it doesn't even feel PG-13 in places. Like in terms of the way the last two movies used violence, this movie doesn't use violence that way, if it uses violence at all. Like we've alluded to with the Thunderdome, the scene in the Thunderdome is a fuck the audience moment. If it's anything, like George Miller literally takes us up to the brink and then shows us this is not your Mad Max from the last two movies. This is someone who is very different. And that difference clearly comes from the time that we don't see him, the in-between time, which is, like you said, when his hair grows and then he's got the camels and all that. Like, clearly he went through more transformative moments, which have not been mined. They could be mined just as easily as anything else could in this franchise. What was Max up to between, 2 and 3? What were his adventures then? We don't know, but this is just another one in the long line of ones. This just happens to make a rather large impact on him. Maybe. That's the other thing. Maybe. By the end of this movie, he's doing the same fucking thing he was in the last movie, literally.
Yeah, if the chronology is to be believed, he saves these kids, who knows what happens, but he gets right back. He goes and finds himself a new V8 Interceptor, doesn't he?
Yeah. Again, if this ties directly back into Fury Road, yeah. But that's what's crazy is, to your point, like, this just ends the way it started. It's very, cyclical. Like, we've started and ended in the same spot twice now, with Max just wandering the wasteland.
Here's the thing now, in the last movie, his motivation purely seems to fuck these people who killed his dog.
Right.
This one, the motivation really is to get these kids safe from the people of Bartertown. And the only way he's able to accomplish that is by basically sacrificing himself, or, not mortally, but eliminating the possibility of escaping with them. Would he have gone with them? Would he have stayed with them? Do you think?
I don't know. This kind of feels like this is the first group that he might have. Maybe?
I think he might have gone with them to where they were going and then said goodbye to them there.
Yes. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that's probably the furthest he would have gone, but because that's the thing about Mad Max, like, he's just not motivated by the glory. Like, so many characters, so many heroes are motivated by the glory of it all, and Max is not motivated by that. I mean, he's rather selfless in this movie. I mean, to your point, he makes it so that they can get away, and in them getting away, he's not able to go with them. Like, that is what happens. Like, that's part and parcel with the climax of the movie.
And his enemy is right on his tail there. The entity is there. For all intents and purposes, in his mind, he believes he's about to be killed.
Right. Like, he sacrificed himself, is what the movie is saying. And then the fact that she grants him mercy at the end is kind of wild, like in and of itself, like a kind of a weird thing for the movie to do. But I think that also speaks to, we haven't talked about her yet, how good Tina Turner is in this movie.
Oh my.
She's so good. And talk about someone who has a massive presence without being in every single scene. Like every time she's on screen, she steals the movie away from it's not hard to steal from Mel Gibson, but he is a very charismatic actor. Not so much in this movie, but she is so good I'm convinced that's why like so much of the movie is focused around her and Max interacting. Because when you're like, we have someone as talented and as charismatic as Tina Turner, we have to have her in at least more than one scene. And we have to have her interact with Max directly, which is not something we've seen in any of these movies up until this point, on top of everything else. He shares more screen time with her than he does with Humongous or Toe Cutter.
This is the most interaction he's going to have with any of the villains. He's dealing directly with the villain. For a portion of the movie, she is not the villain, actually. She's just she's a compatriot. Like, he partners up with her and is doing a job for her. So she becomes the villain of the piece. And what I love about Auntie Entity, speaking of the world building, because in The Road Warrior, we know that there was a war and things happen, but we don't know what anyone or how they dealt with it. Even with Max, we don't get any sense of it. We, at least with Auntie Entity, get this idea where she tells a story about how before the war she was nothing at all, and look at her now. Like, she's created this civilization in the middle of nothing. Like, what, she says, there was thievery and now there's trade. Like that she's bringing back civilization. And honestly, I'm on her side. Maybe that's just because it's Tina Turner. And like you said, you can't take your eyes off Tina Turner in this movie. And that's crazy because there's a lot to look at in this film. Everything, the frames are absolutely packed with all of the ingenuity that we've seen in the earlier movies, but now they're done on a big budget Hollywood scale, but it still feels of a piece with the other one. It doesn't feel out of place at all. And I'm going all over the place here. I'm supposed to be talking about Tina Turner. Tina Turner is awesome.
She's well, and again, like, the movie goes all over the place because of how weird her character is and how her interactions with Max go from, like you said, him being a person that she essentially hires to get her needs done, and in turn she'll give him his stuff back. But the fact that then she, turns around and says, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to exile you, like, she is the motivating force behind the entire movie, effectively.
Well, what's crazy is she ends up being the villain in that she gives chase at the end and probably would have done harm to all of those kids, maybe. Maybe, yeah, because this movie, you're right, it's George Miller just sort of like zigging and zagging in every direction. Like, what would we do here? What's the next thing? Well, let's not do that. Like, what's the opposite of that thing? Because let's do that instead. And because Auntie Entity, I'm on her side for a good portion of the film when Max is on her side. And then when he breaks the deal, by the way, he's supposed to kill.
Yeah.
Okay, he does it for the right reasons, but he did break that deal. And instead of killing him, he busts the deal, so he faces the wheel. He gets exiled, so they just send him out, right? So that's the end of the Bartertown and Auntie Entity story. It's because Max inspires these kids to come looking for Bartertown that things get fucked up again. So it's not like Immortan Joe who's just out to fucking slaughter everyone in his path.
Right.
And it's not like Humongous. He wants that fucking gasoline and he'll fucking murder everyone in his path. This is a person who wanted a job done, didn't get what she wanted, said, okay, now I'm done with you. And then they came and like kicked the hornet's nest. Right. So them going after them she would have to do that at the very least to save face in Bartertown. She's already shown, and that's another thing that goes on in this movie. Maybe people can't just handle politics or something, but the fact that we get to see this really rich world of Bartertown, and then, speaking of big budget Hollywood movie, we go down beneath Bartertown where it's all pigs who are being harnessed for methane gas. So we get these disgusting shots of machinery dumping pig shit everywhere. Watching it again last night, I was reminded of that. I'm like, this is a big budget Hollywood movie released by a major studio, and he's loving close-ups of shit.
And that's what's weird to me about this movie is, like you said, it's a big budget Hollywood movie. Like it feels so not that because it is so exactly what George Miller wanted it to be. He clearly didn't compromise a whole lot if he compromised at all. And we talked about it maybe off the air last time, but I think we mentioned, Byron Kennedy, this is the first film that he is not working with George Miller on. And in a lot of ways, you can tell. Because it feels like George Miller just fucking went for it. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think this movie works a lot better than I have been led to believe it would, not by you, but by other people who have said, well, it is the worst Mad Max movie and blah, 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 blah. Like, honestly, the worst Mad Max movie is probably the first one because it's not anything like any of them in terms of where this is going. But it can't be either. This movie, I mean, I feel like this isn't, I don't know if this is a high point. I don't know if this is a higher than the last movie. But I think in terms of a success, I think it's as successful doing what it's trying to do as the last movie was successful at doing what it was trying to do. And my point being, these two movies are not trying to do the same thing. And comparing them is unfair because the expectations are the next Star Wars movie is going to be like the last one, right? Right. I guess so. So what was Mad Max 3 going to be? I guess just a longer chase movie, except it's not like at all. And that clearly pissed people off.
But the fans just kind of keep, like, there's self-fulfilling prophecies. They want the same thing, so they get it, and then they cheer for a little while, and then they get it again, and they go, this is the same thing.
Right. What if they had made Mad Max 3 as the same thing as the last movie? Would people be going, well, it's just like the last movie, so why would I watch it?
Yeah, and you know what? And ultimately, who cares what their opinion is? Because George Miller ends up, he co-directed. I wanted to speak to the Byron Kennedy thing because, each of the previous movies are a Byron Kennedy film. Like, he's obviously, this is his partner, and he dies in a helicopter accident scouting locations for this film. And so it is kind of a bit facile to say that you can see the difference between the movies because Byron Kennedy is gone. But this was the movie they were making. Like, Byron Kennedy was on board to get this movie made with his partner, George Miller. And that was going to happen. And the movie ends up being co-directed by George Miller and what's the other fellow's name? George Ogilvy or something?
George Ogilvy, yep.
Yeah, George Ogilvy. And I don't understand what the delineation is, like who was doing what and where. Obviously, but one assumes Miller was doing the train chase sequences of the movie. But I don't know which sequences belong to whom or what. I mean, I can assume he took on a co-director because of the absence of Byron Kennedy. I'm sure Byron Kennedy functioned as a co-director. They're there for so many years together on sets, doing everything hand in hand.
Well, and that is the thing about this movie that I think again is so interesting. It feels so much slower. It feels so much more like thought out in terms of what it's trying to do, and it's engaging the audience in a different way. I mean, the last movie felt not hands off with the audience, but it wasn't necessarily challenging the audience. It was like, here's a car chase, and here's another car chase, and Max is just kind of incidental to this whole thing. Max is not incidental here in this movie. Like, without him, there is so much that does not happen in this movie. Without his character doing the things that he does and standing up for the things that he believes. And we really don't see that in the last movie. It's just kind of Max is there. He's a character in this movie. I think the problem is nobody wanted to actually flesh out Mad Max. I don't know why. It's, more interesting when he doesn't talk. It's more interesting when he doesn't do anything. It's the video game protagonist of it all, right? People complain about video game protagonists not talking, and then when they talk too much, they don't like it. It's like, if Nathan Drake has a pithy one-liner every time he kills someone in the game, people might get sick of that. But if they don't say anything, people are going to notice that too. So there doesn't seem to be an easy way to kind of split the difference here. So George Miller just goes, okay, he's going to be more of a character in this movie than he ever has been in the last two. And I think that's clearly not something a lot of people wanted, was to have the Max character evolve and continue to change with the stories that he's in.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately that's it. They were rejecting this whole cloth, it seems. They did not want a softer Max. They want Mad Max. He's mad. He has to be out there the lone gunslinger doing things only for himself. He's not going to hang out with these children. He's not going to have mercy on this pig killer. He's not going to have mercy on Master. Like he's an amoral scumbag. That's what we want. No, it's just a different tale. It's a different shade of Mr. Max. And
is he amoral anyways? Like, he never strikes me as amoral in the last two movies. That's what I don't get. Like, this character in this movie tracks with the last two. Like,
yeah, he's not out there, joining those gangs, and he could easily take over one of those gangs. If he were actually an amoral drifter in the wasteland, he would be the king amoral drifter.
Right. Like that's the scary part, is what happens when Superman is not the hero anymore. That's what Mad Max could have been like. He could have been Immortan Joe, just the guy in charge of everybody. But that's not what he's doing as a character, which is interesting.
And the world that he gets caught up in is interesting. Like, I was saying that the two worlds of Bartertown, what Max wanders into in, typical man with a no name spaghetti Western style is a power play between the people who are creating the gas that runs the electricity down below and the people who are, enjoying its benefits above. You got this, weird. What George Miller ends up doing is sort of defying every expectation. Like, not only is this not like the last movie, but this isn't like any movie. You mentioned, like, is that Act 4 when the final chase happens? It may be. Like, it doesn't seem to follow any structure. It seems happenstance, but it's not. Like, this one gives Max agency in that he just wants to, it's a simple thing. He just wants to get his stuff back, but it's really him and him driving this plot. Like, and as crazy as it is, like, the stuff that when he gets to this valley, this sort of paradise situation with all these kids, like the Blue Lagoon and, buckskins and spears and this lost tribe, as you said, like the Lost Boys, basically. Like, I never would have predicted that we would go there, but like, that doesn't make it bad. Like, I don't know. We need to stop railing against the people who don't like this movie, but
they've dominated the conversation for so long. So that's the problem.
I'll tell you something awesome about this movie. And this worked for me as a fucking 13-year-old kid sitting in the movie theater. The opening credits with fucking Tina Turner's song. That song.
Yeah.
One of the Living. If you haven't heard the song, go listen to it right now. You can hear it anywhere. One of the Living, Tina Turner. If you can hear the movie version, you're going to hear every version you're going to hear is the album version, which is a great version. But if you can hear the movie version, it's much more raw and immediate, and it's great. And the other thing that's great, not only that song playing, is that George Miller has chosen to put the credits up of every actor in the movie and give you their character name. And there's no better series of films for fucking cuckoo character names than the Mad Max films. So actually seeing them on the screen is part and parcel with what I was saying earlier about the crazy shit he's getting away with in a studio film. Like, the company logo comes up and then, here's these characters, Screw Loose and Pig Killer.
Right. Yeah.
Here's some of your major players. Pig Killer.
I find it funny you mentioned Tina Turner. I mean, I would think most people my age are well aware that Tina Turner was brought in to do GoldenEye, a song from that film, because of what it kind of meant to the franchise, because it was so close to Goldfinger in terms of like the level of the person singing the song, and having her here and having her music in this movie, it just gives it such a different vibe and a different like flavor to it. And you said, you don't want to harp on the people that don't like this movie, but I will say, I think it's just a problem in general of pop culture. And in terms of the way people receive things, there's always this, there's always this diminishment of the things that came before it by something that comes after that I think is so unfair. And they need to stand on their own. And it's something that we still deal with now as fans of things in 2024. I mean, they're dealing with it in 1985. We're dealing with it now, which is how far do you go to appease the fans versus making what you want to make? And to your point, like, I wouldn't have expected that he would be dealing with small kids in this movie, or that Tina Turner would be in this movie. Like that in and of itself is pretty wild as a thing that this movie has. And I think that's, again, why I love George Miller as a director so much, is that he's going to make what he wants to make. And that's a good thing, because what he makes clearly resonates with people. And this movie has its defenders. It's not like everybody who saw this movie in 85 hated it. It's just, this wasn't going to resonate with some of the people, clearly, for good reason. But the people that it did resonate with, I think, find the same things to enjoy in it, which you and I have, which is it's fairly high concept. The world is fully fleshed out. And again, I think Mel Gibson is better here than he has been up until this point as Mad Max, because they actually give him something to do. He is here more than he has been in the last two stories. I mean, maybe the first one a little bit as much in this movie, but in the last movie, nothing. We don't know shit about Max, and that's intentional. Here, we get all kinds of stuff that I can only assume if you were here for a car chase and you're hearing all this stuff, you gotta be rolling your eyes in the theaters. It's like, I'm not here for the car chase. I'm here for Mad Max, the character, to see where he's being taken, because that's what anyone who watches a Mad Max movie should theoretically be there for, is the character of Mad Max, and whatever that means. Not, well, it's Mad Max, so there's got to be a car chase. Like, no, not necessarily.
Yeah, like I said, the defying expectation. Early in the movie, when we meet Max, he's got really long hair, right? But once he gets to those kids, they cut all the hair off. And I will say, in addition to all the other stuff I like about this movie, very superficially, I'll say that version of Max, the freshly shorn hair, but now he's got the full gull wings, the white stripes on either side of his head, and the traditional Mad Max jacket, but now he's got basically like a skirt on, hanging over the pants. That look is the best Mad Max ever looked in any of the movies. There. I said it was superficial.
I agree, though. I agree. I'm glad you mentioned it. That wig that they gave him at the beginning of this movie is ridiculous. Absolutely. I'm not going to say it.
Glad they didn't put a beard on, because they wanted to.
Yeah, because he already, that wig looked terrible on its own. That wig is a poor choice. It looks, and given where he ends up later in the movie, like, you can so clearly tell where the wig was and where his hair started and stopped, and where it's one of those things where I was like, man, I'm glad that they're shearing his head, because we do not need to be saddled with this for the entire movie.
But again, defying expectations, right? Like, we don't get the Max we know at all until halfway, 3/4 of the way through the movie.
3/4. What's the Max that we know when he punches a teenage woman in the face?
Yeah, that one.
He just punches a cold coxer. And I love that he stops himself and then he fucking does it anyways. He thinks about it and he's like, I clearly don't have a choice here. This
is for the good. He's constantly making moral choices in this. Like, I don't want to punch her in the face. Wait, no, I actually have to.
Right. And it's so wild because, again, like you mentioned, the Max from the last movie, I don't think he would have shot all those kids to death, but he would not be dealing with those kids at all, I don't think. Like the way he was characterized in the last movie.
In order to stop them, he grabs what the kids don't realize is a rifle, and they just have as a stick, and it's adorned with the bullets they don't realize are live as well, right? So Max, in order to stop them, loads up that weapon and then shoots at their feet. Road Warrior Max would have shot out their feet.
Right. Exactly. And it's crazy because, again, it's not like it's for kids, but they're doing something different with the Max character. They're making him a hero in this movie, the way you would expect in a more traditional franchise like a Star Wars or an Indiana Jones. Like, he is a goody two-shoes in this movie. Like, again, he works for Tina Turner's character, but he doesn't do the one thing that he is supposed to do. And because he doesn't do it, because he has such a problem with killing someone who's, on the spectrum, clearly, he doesn't want anything to do with it. And I like that about the character because, again, that's not the character from the last movie. And characters actually showing some growth and something more than we've seen from them, I think is really should be applauded. Taking a character and trying to have them change and have an actual multi-film arc. Yeah, it's not easy to do, clearly.
Going from this film to the next film, because it seems like in Fury Road, it's just like a hard reset. Like, we're getting back to the Road Warrior Max, right? He's just out on the road with his car again. It can be viewed that way, or you can view it as we viewed each of these movies, and you have to figure what catastrophic thing happened between Thunderdome and Fury Road that he effectively went, fuck it all, I'm just gonna get my car and do my thing again.
Right. Well, yeah, and let's, like I said on the last episode, like there's so many stories that could be told that aren't being told. And, Furiosa, I think, is going to clearly be a prequel and a sequel to Fury Road, which is going to be interesting because, again, like we have had the story of Mad Max told from the opening, pre all of this. And then we followed him in the last movie, and now we're even further down the road. And then with the next movie, we're even further down the road. But I guess, what's interesting is also, like you've just said, like Max in this movie, he's a character. In the next movie, he's just kind of there, back to the way it was. Back to the way the last two movies treated it. And that's what people wanted this whole time, I guess.
I gotta say, that when the movie began, that part threw me. I thought, no, have they just, did he give up? Like, and then my next thought was like, maybe this is not chronological. Maybe this is, this took place before Thunderdome. You know what I mean? This is what leads him to go get that camel train going.
Right. And it's not, I thought the same thing when I saw Fury Road, because I was like, is this like a prequel or something? No, it's a sequel. I mean, this chronological sequel. Tom Hardy is playing the same character that Mel Gibson is playing, but they don't allude. I mean, do they even allude to this movie? Do they even allude to anything that's happened?
But none of the movies allude to prequel.
Right. And that's what's also interesting is that they never do. Like, we don't have Max talking about, humongous, or this and that. Like, none of that. He doesn't even mention he had a wife and a son. He never even mentions that to anybody else.
Well, he does tell Auntie Entity that he was a cop because she asked him what he was doing before the war.
But he never says, like, I had a wife and son and they got murdered. No. Like, we never hear about them. That is, to your point, the only thing that they mention is that he was a cop. That's it. Like, that's the only kind of piece of the original movie that still exists here is he acknowledges that he was a cop.
I would not have a problem with any future Mad Max film having Auntie Entity return.
Same.
And I know Tina Turner has passed away, but we've recast the fucking lead. We can certainly recast Auntie Entity because I love Auntie Entity. I think she's a great character, and I think she's a worthy adversary. But again, is she an adversary? She could be a fucking super cool ally in a future film.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, like we've talked about with Bruce Spence in this movie, he's kind of antagonistic towards Mad Max more in this movie than he is in the last one. I mean, they only kind of come around on one another right near the end of the movie. But what's interesting is, like, again, like he's kind of at odds with Max and is the reason the things are happening in this movie. But at the end of the movie,
we talked about Bruce Spence in Road Warrior in the last movie, but we really haven't talked about him here in this movie because he's another pilot in this film, but this is a different character. Like George Miller has said, this is a different character than the first one, right?
He has a kid in this movie. He has a son.
Now, Max, does he recognizes him at the end, but that's only to say that I recognize you from knocking me off my
correct. That's the way I read it.
Okay, because I think when I was a kid and I first saw it, I thought like, oh, this must be the same guy. I mean,
well, it's such a weird thing to do.
Behind the scenes information was pretty scarce back then, so I couldn't have known George Miller intended that to be a whole different character. So for many years, I assumed that was the same guy.
It's like Pierre Richard in all those Francis Weber films, just playing a character with the same name, but not the same character. It's, I mean, and what a thing is, like, obviously you have Bruce Spence playing a character. Bruce Spence is a very recognizable person, and he's playing another guy who's a pilot, flying a vehicle very similar to the last vehicle he flew. Like, they're not doing themselves any favors, but also who cares, right? Like, this was a time and a place.
Bruce Spence have a child? Like, could we get a child in one of the next Mad Max movies? Someone who looks just like Bruce Spence to play a similar pilot character? Like,
that would be interesting. I mean, they've brought him back twice. So they must think that what he's bringing to the role is good enough. I mean,
somehow in Mad Max's adventures, there will be a character who is flighted, who should be part of it. Like, maybe that's part of the myth of Mad Max. It's always the same couple of people he's going to interact with. Like, perhaps we're hearing the same story, the bastardized version of the Mad Max story from many, many years later, where now the pilot who was a grifter is now his helper.
That's the thing. That's kind of what I was wondering too. Like, is it just the convention of the story being told, the way that they're telling it, right? Like you said, like, oh, he's always has these same kind of people, and oh, there's always kids somehow. I mean, I guess in Fury Road there aren't kids, but in this movie and in the last movie, Max has a soft spot for kids. Even Max in the last movie had a soft spot for a kid, because that a little child throughout the entire movie, like him and Max are kind of buddies towards the end of that movie. They're in the car together at the chase scene at the end of the movie.
Yeah, well, there's only the unborn in Fury Road, so there's no real children interaction. It's just him and moms.
Wait, I completely forgot about that. I forgot that that's what that movie is about. Jeez Louise.
Oh, yeah.
Again, so weird, like so weird. George Miller is such a weird guy, an oddly specific human being that, like, of course, there's going to be, pregnant mothers in the new Mad Max movie that he has to protect. Of course, like that's George Miller just does whatever the hell he wants. Is what.
Do you have his filmography in front of you?
I do.
Could you tell me how many films he has directed?
12.
So he's directed 12 films. I would like to present George Miller as the antithesis of Quentin Tarantino's 10 movies in done theory, right? His idea is like you only make a certain number of movies and then you're just spinning your wheels creatively. Nobody makes a good movie after their 10th movie or something like that. Well, here's the guy in his 80s. You know what? And ordinarily, I would agree with him because, you look at somebody like Ridley Scott, just stops, Ridley. It's enough already. But George Miller is in his 80s. And he's making fucking bangers, man.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I'm with you.
It can be done, and he's doing it. So how about that? How about instead of this arbitrary bullshit, I got 10 movies thing, you just fucking knuckle down and try and make something great?
Steven Soderbergh's retired how many times at this point? Can't keep him away.
Everyone needs to fire their publicists, turn off their social media, shut the fuck up, and just do the work.
Just do the damn thing. Just do the damn thing already. And we've even seen that I would believe that Mad Max may even be able to continue beyond George Miller. Because look, that's the other thing. We're talking about a franchise that expertly recast its main character to someone else. They're also doing it again. They're recasting a main character from the last film in the upcoming film. Anya Taylor-Joy. Like,
no one will be spared.
No, and I'm okay with that. Like, you know what that is? That's just James Bond logic.
Yeah, or comic book logic. I'm used to a different artist drawing my favorite characters, and
I don't comic book logic though, because MCU is the reason shit's like this now, right? Like the MCU is kind of the reason we have this actor playing this character can't play somebody else. Like the whole Evan Peters.
I didn't say cinematic universe.
Shit. I know, I get it.
I said comic book. We're reading a comic book.
I know, but you know what I'm getting at. It's easy to equivocate the two in this day and age.
And that's what actually makes me worried about George Miller no longer being at the helm of future Mad Max installments. Is now it's going to fall to somebody who's going to immediately go like, "What's the mythology? What are we working towards? What's the mystery box?"
Right.
Whoever takes over the Mad Max franchise is going to go like, First thing we do is remake the Road Warrior.
Right. Exactly. And that's my point. Like you said, comic books. I agree with you. Mad Max has more in common with comic book logic than it does with most mainstream storytelling the way it is now, because there's an expectation that people have been conditioned to now, which is if someone is playing look, Hugh Jackman is playing Wolverine again. The guy who said he was done how many times over now? Like they couldn't even recast Wolverine.
I saw that preview when I went to see the Planet of the Apes movie, and my mother turned to me and said, "Is he too old to play that part?"
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you look like him, I don't think so.
In this case, I think that's the point. But yeah, I mean,
well, but that's the thing. Like, would Mel Gibson have come back for Fury Road? Like, that's the question that I always think about. Because, yes, they recast him as Tom Hardy. But
they were talking, man. I mean,
for years. It was
going to happen in 2005, and if it had happened then, he definitely would have played the part.
Right. And I think that the way he plays it in this movie would have been what we would have gotten in the next movie. I think that the way Mad Max is used in Fury Road is a response to this movie completely. But I think it's also because there's enough time and distance that they could just go, well, we're just going to do this again. But if they had actually made 4 close to or around the time that this movie came out, I think it would have been more of this, more world building, which I was would be totally game for. Show me more of this world. Maybe even have Max leave Australia. I mean,
if they had made the Fury Road with Mel Gibson, Max, you're right, would have sort of continued this arc from Beyond Thunderdome. He would have been a much more paternalistic character in it. Because he would have by the very nature of the age he would be at, like, he wouldn't be doing all those stunts. Like,
he'd be like old Indiana Jones.
I'm sure Nux, the sort of war boy that he befriends, would have been a much bigger character and like sort of acted as his proxy in more of the film. But because they cast it younger, they're able to make Max the more vital of the two.
Which I think is the smart way to go about doing it. I mean, look, yes, we have Mel Gibson in this movie, and he turns in his best performance as Mad Max, but clearly this is not what was going to continue to define the franchise once they got back around to making it. So, because again, they were cognizant of the response to this movie, which I think is unfair, because the chase at the end of this movie is as good as the chase at the end of the last movie. It's different. It's very different. The expectations are different. The kind of vehicles they're using are different, but I think it works just as well. It's just different.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with any of the action in this movie. Like, yeah, it's what you're saying. This is a different movie than the last one, but I will say that certainly with distance, I'm sure people could reevaluate it if they gave it a try. And I'll say, with that same distance, it is a fitting end to the Mel Gibson era Mad Max.
Yeah, they give his character kind of an ending.
Yeah, it goes from like losing everything to possibly attaining everything, but realizing that it's worth sacrificing himself to maintain that.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah, because he lets them get away.
That isn't some hacky fucking, screenwriting course bullshit. Like, that's a genuine progression of a character.
Yeah. He has an arc through 3 movies, which is kind of not, I guess that's not what people expected or wanted. I like that Max as a character grows, and by the end of this movie, he's willing to make a choice that the Max from the last movie was not willing to make at all. He would not have sacrificed himself for that town. He wouldn't have. He didn't want to. He is helping them only because he literally fucking had to. By the time it gets to that point, he's helping them because there is no other choice for him.
For the misguided people who think that this was a wrong turn for the Mad Max character, I would invite you to go read the works of Robert E. Howard, his Conan the Barbarian books. Conan never changes in any of those books. Oh, no, wait, he does. He becomes a king. He learns. He has many, many different adventures. I'm just saying, like, this is not a new thing that we would get some other flavor of a character. And the fact that this isn't what they thought they wanted is baffling to me.
And does this not have like one of the great movie fight scenes in it with the Thunderdome?
I love Thunderdome, man.
Yeah.
Without Thunderdome, we wouldn't have the fucking Dr. Dre and Tupac song, the California Love song.
That's fair.
Well, we would have the song, but we wouldn't have that excellent video.
That's fair. I mean, I love I love the production design in this movie. I mean, we've talked about it a lot with the last movie and this movie a little bit, but the production design in this movie is wild. This is like unlike, it's not that they don't make movies like this in Hollywood anymore, but nobody is interested in making this kind of movie anymore. Only some filmmakers are really availing themselves to go with practical effects for these big sets. Look, Ridley Scott made Prometheus the way that Ridley Scott made Alien. And people were like, oh my God, and George Miller made Fury Road the way he made this movie, which is leaning on the practical effects, because you can't replicate the Thunderdome in CGI and it work as well as it does in this movie. Clearly a real set. It's well lit. It's interesting to look at. They're bouncing around on bungee cords. It's bizarre, but it's way more interesting than two guys just fist fighting in a coliseum.
It certainly is. I will say that the thought of a CGI Thunderdome does appeal to me.
If done by George Miller, sure, but like not done by somebody else.
Because, what I like about Fury Road is it feels like a synthesis of Road Warrior and Thunderdome, because we get to spend a little more time in the civilization that's being threatened in Immortan Joe and his little kingdom. We get to spend time with that. And then we get hints to these other kingdoms that exist. And that's just only one part of the wasteland, right? This little fiefdom of the Bullet King and the Gasoline King. I don't know. I forgot what I was saying. Gonna have to cut this part. I'm sorry.
God
I'm
damn
really
it.
fucking high right now.
You're talking about the Gasoline King and the Bullet King.
Yeah, the different differentiations, but I know what I was
Go ahead.
it's perfect synthesis because we get to see the fucking Martin Joe, blah blah blah. I don't know. It doesn't.
We're gonna see so much more of this Mad Max world in the next decade. I guarantee it.
It's a frightening and enticing proposition.
Right? It really is. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, the hands that it's in, I think are good hands. Because for all of this movie's perceived failings, I don't think any of them are fair. I think it's a purely subjective issue that this movie is fighting with. This movie's well made. It's interesting to look at. It's well cast. I think the practical effects are well done. The set design is fucking insane. I mean, so much of this is done for real. These are crazy sets, and you feel it. And again, like I said, not that they don't make movies like this anymore. People just aren't interested in going out of their way to make these giant, real movies. And even something like Fury Road doesn't necessarily hit all the notes that this movie does, but that's okay. It in and of itself is doing something different. And I applaud a franchise that is trying to do different things with each movie versus a franchise that's just doing the same fucking thing over and over and over again, because that's just monotony. That's a stunning lack of creativity, if that's anything.
They just keep making the same thing over and over again. What are you doing? Make the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, well, you can't win. Yeah, because when they tried to make something different from, well, I don't know. I mean, again, we talked about Star Wars a little bit. There are so many things that they've tried to do anything different with, and the fan backlash is just, The Last Jedi is still the most reviled Star Wars movie ever made. And that movie's been out for a decade almost at this point. Give it a rest.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Similarly to this movie, I feel like The Last Jedi may in the future age better than anyone gives it credit for, but this movie in a lot of ways has aged better than the original Road Warrior has, because I feel like you could put this on for a modern audience and they would get it and get into it more than with the original.
Let me go on record. The Canto Bight sequence, or the Casino Planet sequence in The Last Jedi, is misguided and ultimately boring. And he was trying to do something different there because everything else he was doing was also something different. It's just that one didn't work. I think The Last Jedi is fucking great. I really enjoyed that movie for all the reasons we're talking about George Miller, because it was every time you expected something to happen, he did it differently and justified his reasoning in doing so over and over and over again. And over again, fans were like, no, I don't want that. I wanted the other thing.
Right. And it's guys, you could just go watch the other thing. The other thing's been done. Yeah, and now we're at the point with Star Wars where people don't want it anymore because it is worn out its welcome.
Do you want to see Luke Skywalker fight fucking, what's the fucking guy's name?
Kylo Ren?
Yeah. Do you want to see Luke Skywalker fight Kylo Ren? Do you think that's in any way could possibly be any more thrilling than seeing him fight Darth Vader twice?
Right. Right.
What would be the goddamn point of seeing Luke Skywalker fighting with a fucking lightsaber again, and the only person he can fight is Kylo Ren?
Right.
It would be so disappointing.
Yeah.
Oy.
I know. And again, like I said, I look at a movie like this and I think to myself, this has been happening for a very long time. Just the internet has made it easier to amplify it, easier to really, look, we live in a universe where the Snyder Cut came out because of the support for it. And I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. My opinion on it doesn't matter. They did it anyways. But
it's a bad thing because it was a financial decision.
Right.
That's all it was. They knew there was a fan base who would watch it, but it wasn't that the fans convinced them at all. They smelled money and then they threw some money at it and then they got their money.
Right.
But what it does do is embolden those toxic assholes, and now they feel that everything that they think and want, they deserve.
Right. That's the bad part of this. And again, it comes back to this idea of the response to Michael Keaton being cast as Batman, or Mad Max 3 not just being another long chase movie. When the fans don't get what they want, they tend to get upset. But filmmakers and TV showrunners are going to do what they want to do. And
the only person
I'm here for it.
The only person who actually figured out how to make sequels that were different than the original one and still satisfied the fans is James Cameron, who did it twice. He not only made Aliens, which is a completely different movie than Alien, and satisfied everybody, but he wrote the script for Rambo First Blood Part 2, which, if you watch that first movie, it's just about a Vietnam vet who gets fucked with by the local law enforcement and then like takes to the hills where they hunt him down. There's nothing super heroic about it at all. The second film is a pure action fucking extravaganza with him refighting the Vietnam War, and people loved that more than the first movie.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, again, you mentioned James Cameron. I mean, his name is on the same list with George Miller's name, right? Like, these are people who their involvement in a project elevates it immensely. Just them being involved. And look, speaking of Justice League, there's a universe where George Miller got to make his version of the Justice League because that was a thing that was going to happen.
Oh, man. What could have been?
Armie Hammer as Batman? Yeah, boy, that would have been weird. There was a lot of weird things going on in the mid-2000s with comic book stuff. And
that casting sounds delicious.
It's, wow, simply stunning.
Save me the ribs.
Yeah, he's, I don't know. I mean, I think that, George Miller, I give him a very wide berth as a filmmaker because I trust the decisions that he makes. And I think that they have yielded some of the most interesting films that have come out in ever. I mean, again, a movie about dancing penguins we have George Miller to thank for that. He wrote the goddamn script for both of those movies.
We haven't even talked about the other in-between shit. Like, in between Road Warrior and Thunderdome, he does that Twilight Zone segment, which is fucking phenomenal.
Best part of that entire movie.
And then he directs The Witches of Eastwick. Have you watched that? Have you seen that?
I've never seen that.
Holy God, man. It's so fucking different than everything else, just like the Babe movie, just like the Dancing Penguin movie, just like the Genie movie he just did with Idris Elba, that, 3,000 Years of Longing?
Yeah, just like the movie I saw in high school, Lorenzo's Oil.
Good God, man. He's all over the place.
Yeah, and it's what's weird is like there are very few directors who are as much of a chameleon with the success that George Miller has had. None of the movies that you mentioned have been failures. They've all been objectively successes on top of everything else. I mean, Mad Max is or was at the time the most profitable film ever made. Like, that's who gets the credit there. George Miller does. Dr. George Miller on top of everything else.
God bless him.
Can you imagine what he must be like what he must be like to just be around? It's probably like Peter Jackson, just like a constant font of just like, no, we're going to do this. No, we're going to do this. We're going to, like, I don't know, like those kinds of directors, they know what they want. They know how to get it. And I respect the shit out of that, even if the movies aren't made for me. Being able to make what you want in the studio system, holy shit. Like, there's so many people that have to thank George Miller and James Cameron and to George Lucas for being able to make movies and then transition into the studio system and continue to make their movies. It's pretty crazy.
And in Miller's case, it's even more kind of spectacular because all of these movies are kind of hard won.
Right.
Like, it's not like everyone was giving him a blank check on these things right up until fucking Fury Road. Like, they got shut down a bunch of times and they had studio interference on the set and they told them they couldn't have the ending. They had to they shut down production before they finished the ending and then had to go back and reshoot the ending. Like, so, and, in each of and it took forever to get made. Like, this guy with this proven track record with these movies, it took him forever to get anyone to let him make another one. So, it's not like a Spielberg situation where it's just like, what do you want to do?
Right. Here's Steve. We'll just back the truck up to your house, and Jurassic Park, we'll just give you that one too, because why not? Who cares? Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, George Miller kind of stands alone in terms of making it on his own with his own ideas. I mean, it's very Sam Raimi. Probably is a better comparison.
Totally. George Romero, like, he's one of those mavericks.
Yeah, like making his thing and not taking anybody else's ideas like any further than he needs to, but he's going to stay true to his idea throughout. And again, that's very hard to do in the industry. Like,
if John Waters was a Motorhead, he'd be George Miller.
Yeah, we're just naming auteurs pretty much. Like, that's
let's name some more.
Well, I mean, I would even go as far as to say like Scorsese, really. Like, I mean,
Francis Ford Coppola. You see that Megalopolis trailer?
no, I haven't. But again, someone who's doing what they want, right? Like these kinds of directors are few and far between now. You know, a Jonathan Glazer type, or I know you and I probably different opinions about some of his movies, but an Ari Aster type, just making something very specific, very weird that they want to make. And that's, again,
You know, sometimes in movie trailers where it'll say, from the visionary director of blah, blah, blah. And it's the most pretentious thing ever. But if they say from the visionary director, George Miller, I'm like, yeah.
yeah, pretty much.
What is it that George has done? Please tell me more.
Right. And tell me about the Penguin movie again. Again, the Penguin movie is George Miller. That's the other thing. Like some of these other directors we've mentioned have not been able to navigate children's films the way George Miller has. Like, and on top of that, an animated child's film, like not a live action kids movie, a animated one. Just sure. And I think that, I mean, look, Beyond Thunderdome is such a pivot for George Miller, and I think it informs the rest of his career too. Like this is in a lot of ways, you know, this is literally his third movie, but it is the first time in a long line of times where he's bucking expectations and probably reveling in it, I would assume. Because if I were him, I'd be like, I don't give a shit if you don't like my movie, because clearly some people do. This movie still made money. This movie was still immensely successful in terms of post-release, but had a big tail in like the rentals. And again, Mad Max 3 is being made because of the success of the last two movies. So can't take that away from him either. People didn't resonate with this movie. It's aged way better than so many other movies that came out around the same time have, because this is so unlike everything else. You only get to see this in this movie, which you can't say for a lot of stuff in the 80s.
Put this third movie against the most recent third Star Wars movie.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. This movie and that new Star Wars movie have nothing in common, because that third Star Wars movie feels completely reactionary to everything that everybody had bad to say about Last Jedi. I would compare Fury Road and Rise of Skywalker more than I would compare this and that, because this movie is the movie that the next movie's made in response to. Right.
I would compare them as the anti-Thunder.
Yeah.
Like a movie that just made every wrong decision, and people like that movie.
Rise of Skywalker?
Yeah.
Man,
they hate it as well.
That's weird to me that anybody could like that movie. It's so reactionary. It would be like in this movie if all of a sudden, you know, Max had a family again, and Max was. Yeah, it's like these are decisions that don't need to be made here. We don't need any of this anymore. Take it in a different direction, but don't take it in that direction. And that's the thing. I feel like people watch this movie and went, "You're taking it in a direction I don't like." But I think it was the logical direction. I mean, if we're watching a character who has been unable to connect with people, essentially only children, really. The only person Max resonated with in the last movie was a child. Why are we surprised that in this movie, a whole group of children are wanting him to be there and protect him, or protect them and them protect him? It's not that big of a stretch to me. But again, having seen these movies, boom, 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 maybe that's why. I mean, that's got to be part of it, clearly, because I'd never seen this before. I was more amenable to this than I feel like people clearly in 85 were. But again, the worst thing about this movie really is the fact that it's coming out after a movie that is a genuine classic that deserves all the praise that it gets. And I think this movie does as well. It's just, you can't come after a movie like Road Warrior and not expect to get compared to it constantly.
And at the time, you got to remember that like Road Warrior was on cable nonstop.
Right.
And people were wearing out their videotapes of the Road Warrior. Right. So what they wanted was Road Warrior 2. Right.
Not Mad Max 3, which is what this is. And that's the important thing, to your point. This is not Road Warrior 2. It's Mad Max 3. This is the character, and Mad Max Fury Road is Road Warrior 2, I would say. At least my recollections of it are that it is more like what I saw in Mad Max 2, that it is a weird movie about saving a ragtag group of kids who survived from a downed Boeing 747.
But they just put them in the cab of the truck.
Right. Yeah. They toe the line. And you know what? I still am kind of curious, and maybe you can explain it to me. So the thing with, so he just shows up and they already have a story about him and they know what he looks like. I couldn't figure, I don't understand the story of Walker. He leaves, but then he's supposed to come back and look like Mad Max.
I'm assuming whoever Walker was already looked a bit like Mad Max.
Okay.
He had graying temples, which is not like, a bizarre distinction.
Right, but like the picture on the wall is literally Mad Max, though.
Yeah, okay, yes, but
I'm just saying, like, what I didn't understand is that whole aspect of that story. I didn't understand what the point of him as a character was, and then them being like, well, he's returned. It's like no. I didn't get it. I didn't get what they were reaching for there. There's some sort of like, this is all faded. It was like, is that what they're going at? I can't figure it out.
I don't think it is faded. I think, if anything, it's a huge mistake.
Right.
Because they follow that prophecy. They make that prophecy happen by going to Bartertown and making themselves flee. Their myth was that Captain Walker, these are all the children of the descendants of a plane crash, who found this grotto of paradise and have been living there sort of ever since. And there are no more adults. It's all the kids. And they have this myth that the captain went off to find help and that he would return one day. If they had just left it at that would be all right for them. But because they thrust that upon Max, who shows up and bears some resemblance, a very striking resemblance, to their myth, it ends up being kind of end of paradise. So in a way, it's defying that expectation too, because this isn't Paul Atreides coming to save the Arakeen.
That's fair.
He fucks shit up. And I know that Paul Atreides is not the chosen one of the Bene Gesserit, orchestrated all that. I know all that, okay?
Don't leave that in the comments. We get it. Well, and to your point about subverting expectations, I mean, yeah, the Mad Max character at the end of the movie subverts the expectations again. Like you said, he makes a choice that is not a choice he would have made in the last movie, not willingly, which is, to help out this group of people. We see him literally forced to help them in the last movie. And then they screw him over anyways. Yeah. In this movie, he makes that choice, which is so interesting because it's clear that those kids have had an effect on him and that has transformed him as a character. And, again, like you said, I feel like this was a worthy conclusion to Mad Max as played by Mel Gibson. But I also kind of just wish...
It's the best that guy who lost his family was going to get in this wasteland.
Right. That's the furthest he can get.
Help other children escape the fucking madness and go start a civilization.
Which makes sense. That makes sense as what the character of Mad Max ultimately becomes. And I will say, honestly, for me, if anything, it kind of feels like a shame that the Fury Road's a reboot and it wasn't just its own thing. Because
if I'm being honest with you, Chris, I got the same feeling when I watched it. I love the movie. I'll go watch it right now. But I did feel like, well, as much as he's zigging and zagging in each of the 3 previous movies, this does feel like a return to something. And yes, it's spectacularly done. And yes, it's a different adventure, but it did feel like we were kind of treading the same ground.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, as we kind of close this episode out and look to Fury Road as the second to last stop, or the last stop before Furiosa, I haven't seen Fury Road since it came out. And all I remember is that exact thing you're saying, which is, why isn't this just its own thing? You can do so much more if this is the starting place, as opposed to this is where we're picking back up. And look, all I remember is the car chase of it all. I don't remember any plot particulars or anything, but knowing that this is where the story ends and I hadn't seen this part of the story, it is kind of like, I kind of wish that there was not this Mad Max aspect of that character, because it's still there. It's baked into it. I mean, you mentioned the thing about ghosts at the beginning of the 4th movie. That's got to be in reference to these 3 movies, if not just Mad Max, probably, I'm assuming, in terms of his wife and son. Or maybe, that's the other thing, I guess there are some other people he failed to save, like the woman in white in the last movie, and I guess Pig Killer in this movie. But for the most part, he's also very good at getting the job done successfully.
Well, now that you've watched these 3 movies and you know that he's capable of saving people, watching Fury Road, you'll do it with kind of newer eyes, because none of the ghosts that are presented to him are ghosts from these adventures.
Sure. I didn't expect them to be specifically. So.
Right. So, but I mean, they very well could have just dressed somebody up like a pig killer and like had him run at the screen or something, but they don't do that. So and yes, like when I said that I did feel like it was a retread when I was watching it, it's a rare movie that gets better on every rewatch. So I just wanted to qualify that. Like I don't feel like it's just a retread of the other ones. It's a fucking fantastic movie, like all on its own.
But it is a legacy sequel.
Yeah.
I mean, sequel's one thing, legacy sequel's another. And with the term legacy in front of it, you're going to be getting what you've already got.
Yeah.
I mean, Halloween, that was a legacy sequel. Any legacy sequel that's out there is real. I mean, Force Awakens is a legacy sequel. It's just A New Hope all over again. Fury Road shares more in common DNA-wise with Road Warrior than it does with this movie, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Well, what I was trying to say is that, now that you haven't seen that movie in a while, watch it now and know that somewhere in between Thunderdome and this movie, something really fucking horrible happened to Max.
Clearly. Because, yeah, I mean, does he even talk in Fury Road?
Very little.
Okay, because that's the other thing I remember is like Tom Hardy doesn't have much to say as Mad Max. And that was a whole thing that people were making a big deal about. And now I understand why. Because, again, where he's left...
It actually makes sense for the character to kind of return to Road Warrior Farm if something fucking catastrophic had occurred to him. And clearly it has.
Right. Huh. Yeah, no, I'm super excited to revisit Fury Road. And then obviously, Furiosa beyond that. But yeah, no... I'm glad we finally are here at this point because I was curious what my response to Beyond Thunderdome was, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than all the things I had heard up until this point for the most part. Because again, like this is a movie that for the long time was talked about as being a bad movie and a bad sequel. And I think it's especially now, that's really unfair given the bad sequels we have seen to franchise things that are objectively bad. But yeah, this movie's just different. And I actually, again, I will always appreciate a director doing something outside of the box. And the further outside the box that they can make it entertaining, the better. So
agreed.
Anything else we want to talk about with Beyond Thunderdome?
I think we said it all.
Cool. So, Father Malone, until you and I talk about Fury Road, where can people find you and the assorted audio things that you do?
Go over to weirdingwaymedia.com. I'm the co-host of Night Mr. Walters, a taxi podcast where HP and I talk all about the classic television series. Or you can hear me on Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, and its sister series, Midnight Viewing Anthologies Attack, which is I co-host a new sort of bi-weekly show with Antonio Lepore, where we're checking out anthology, not just horror movies, any anthology movie, starting with Batman the Animated Series anthology episode. Almost Got Him. That's coming up soon.
Which is a great episode. Probably the best episode of that show, frankly.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. As for me, Weirding Way Media is where you can find all the stuff that I work on audio-wise. I do a weekly video podcast that you can find the audio of. That's called Film Foundations. And then I do a monthly show on Patreon called Rankin' on Bond with Patreon exclusive content as well on my Patreon. But that's the main exclusive. $10 and up, you can hear the projection booths. Mike White and I, along with Richard Haddam, Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf, talk about James Bond once a month. And Father Malone, you will be joining us very soon.
I'm very excited.
Actually, the next recording we're doing, I'm pretty sure, is the one that you're on. We're going to be talking about the first Roger Moore film. The moment James Bond pivots, as one might say. Talk about inflection points for a franchise.
Is he living and letting die?
He's definitely doing a reggae interlude with Paul McCartney. That's for sure.
God,
Jesus,
so excited!
I'm super excited. And yeah, until you hear us talk about Fury Road, we'll catch you on the next episode.